Earlier this year, my wife and I bought and moved into a 120-year-old house in the country. The house has a lot of charm and the yard's full of natural beauty, but for me, a real added bonus to this property was the detached garage building. In addition to the two-car garage area, the building also has a 12-foot by 30-foot workshop in the back. As a musician and content creator, this meant the potential for a home studio that I've always wanted. That much workspace in close proximity to the home without actually being inside the house was real fine. However, in its original condition, the shop was a long way from move-in ready. It was previously more of a regular workshop area with a bare concrete floor, unpainted plywood walls and ceiling, and a ton of nailed-in workbenches. And not only that, but it was also dirty and full of junk. And I really wanted to jump into fixing it up right away, but this property and the house had so many issues that needed urgent attention that it took me a few months before I could make this area a priority. But a few months ago, I was able to start working on transitioning the shop into a suitable workspace and studio for music and content creation. And after cleaning it out and removing all the extra workbench features, I painted the walls and ceiling and installed an LVP floor. At that point, it felt nice enough to start moving some of my equipment in, but since it was basically a giant box of hard surfaces, the sound in here was awful. Even with a few rugs on the floor, I couldn't stand to play or listen to music in here at all. It was even hard to set audio levels while editing video without using headphones. The need for some acoustic treatment was really urgent. I've used RLX foam for acoustic conditioning in a room before, but it's fairly expensive to cover enough, and it doesn't seem to address the reflection of low-end and mid-range frequencies very well at all. After giving it some thought, I decided to make acoustic panels for the room using safe and sound insulation. I don't want to get too scientific about it, just enough to make something that would get good results without breaking the bank. And since I was in a hurry to get this done, I went on YouTube to find a good method for building them so I wouldn't waste too much time reinventing the wheel. And a video that I used as a guide was the DIY Acoustic Panels video by Lonely Rocker. His method of making them was very practical, and it did a nice job of explaining things. He's posted a few videos on the topic, so if you're thinking about making some panels, I'd recommend checking it out. You can buy professionally made panels, but I didn't want to spend that much on them. Plus, any tools I'd need to do this, I needed to buy for the house anyway. So I'll show you some of my process here, but if you really want to know all the details on how to build these things, go watch the video on Lonely Rocker's YouTube channel. I'd like to point out that he refers to them as cheap and awesome. In his video, he spends under $20 per panel, or at least that's what he says. I'll talk a little bit more about what it costs me later in this video. But I wanted to start out by making a set of 8 2-foot by 4-foot panels. And after gathering up all the materials, I just started by assembling the frames. The frames for the main panels and clouds, which are just panels that are hung from the ceiling, are constructed from 1x4 boards. In addition to the main rectangle, there are just a couple of cross pieces to strengthen the frame and provide a little cradle for the insulation bat. I decided to go ahead and make all 8 frames first before continuing to the next step. It took me a day or so to get them all ready. The next step was to install the insulation and wrap them. First, I laid the frame face down on the main fabric just like he described and cut it to size. I used duck canvas, which was a little more expensive than I had hoped, but it's breathable, looks good, and it's pretty easy to work with. I won't go into too much detail here, but it's important to make sure that the fabric will wrap all around the sides and overhang the back of each board enough to attach it easily. Once things are laid out, the insulation can go in. Since I couldn't find 24-inch bats of safe and sound, I used 16-inch bats. And since my panels were 24-inch wide and the 16-inch safe and sound comes in packages of 12 bats, that gave me enough for 8 panels at 1.5 bats each. After placing the insulation inside the frame, the next step is just to wrap the fabric around the sides and staple it to the back of the frame. I followed the Lonely Rocker's suggestion, applying the main fabric first and waiting to put the backing on last. He made a good point that you might want to go in and change or adjust the insulation at some point. And if you put the backing on last, you won't have to mess up your main fabric to get inside the panel. And for the backing material, I did take the Lonely Rocker suggestion, and I used that thin fabric that you put on the bottom of stuffed furniture like chairs and couches. Once the panels were wrapped, all that was left to do was to hang them. And I used a combination of hooks and eye screws for the ceiling clouds. Lining everything up to mount them on the ceiling was pretty tedious, but taking the time to carefully measure everything made the hanging part go a lot smoother. The initial 8 panels made a huge difference in the room, and I decided to live with it for a few weeks before making any more adjustments. And since this room is so long, I just wanted to keep some of the space available for photography background setups and just general utility purposes and storage. And that end of the room can contribute some unwanted reflections, so I got a pair of really tall sound blankets that reached from the ceiling to the floor and covered the entire width of the room, so I can just cut that end off. I'm pretty happy with them so far. I got the ones that are white on one side and black on the other. So the white side keeps things from feeling too dark in here, and I can use that side to bounce light for video if I want a side fill or something like that. But even with all that, I still felt like the sound in this room could be controlled a little more, especially the low end and lower mid-range. So I decided to make another round of sound panels. This time I made some bass traps with a similar method, but I used 1x6 lumber for the frames and installed 2 layers of insulation material. And since they were going in the corners, I decided to make them 16 inches wide. This way the bats fit perfectly and the panels don't take up too much room in those corners. I also made 2 more clouds for the ceiling with the same 2 foot by 4 foot dimensions as the other clouds. And it seemed like I could still use some smaller panels in a few spots. So I decided to make 4 2-foot square panels to round things out. The amount of gray duck canvas that it took to make the bass traps and the main panels was really about all I could get from the store, so I decided to make the little smaller panels with a shade of purple that Prince would surely approve. After all that, I think I finally got this room in pretty good shape for sound. It's damped down well enough so that I can play music in here, I can record music in here, record speech or vocals, and I can mix things and have some clarity. And that's a big difference from what it was before. The previous video that I did on this channel, I did in here when it was not sound treated at all yet, and I had to use a lav mic for that video because the room just sounded so awful. There would be no way to use a shotgun mic like what I'm using right now, which is actually just out of frame right here. And that's something that I probably should have done, is made a before and after with this mic so you could hear it, but just rest assured that this room was pretty much unusable when it comes to any kind of shotgun mic or trying to do anything with music in here beforehand. And now it's in pretty good shape. I feel really good about it, and it was a little bit more expensive than I might have wanted it to be, but still a lot less than paying for commercially produced panels. And again, I think that the placement and quantity of the panels probably makes more of a difference than who made them. So the principles of making these things is probably kind of a straightforward matter. At least it seems so in all the research that I did. And with regards to the Lonely Rockers claim that they were cheap and awesome and that he could make them for $20 a piece. That's awesome that he was able to do that, but under current prices for lumber and with me buying a little bit probably higher end material to wrap them in, they ended up costing me more like between $40 and $50 a piece for the main panels and the maybe even a little bit more for the bass traps, and then probably $25 or $30 a piece for each of the little 2-foot square panels. So anyway, my costs were a pretty good bit higher, but I feel pretty good about these results. So according to the Lonely Rockers' claims of cheap and awesome, I'll say not so cheap necessarily, but definitely pretty awesome as far as the results are concerned. I really appreciate him putting up such a good video for that. So if you want to make some of these things, make sure you go over to his channel and check that out. In the meantime, I'm going to be developing this room more and more, so I'll probably make more videos about what I'm doing in here. So if you're interested in that sort of thing and the process, maybe you want some ideas, please come back, check it out, and see what I'm up to on here. And in the meantime, click like, subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.